Hi everyone, this is Elias Martin of CollectingJapanesePrints.com. Welcome to Woodblock Wednesday, where on Wednesdays we get together and discuss Japanese prints, paintings, history, and culture. It's been a bit since I've last been on a Woodblock Wednesday. It's been a kind of a busy last few weeks, and so I'm really happy to be back on Woodblock Wednesday and show you some amazing artwork. I will be doing this without interruption for the foreseeable future, so please tune in every Wednesday. So today I'd like to give you a preview of a seminar that I will be presenting this Saturday. It's producing this seminar in conjunction with Asia Week, New York, and it starts off this weekend. And so I will be presenting a lecture on Japanese prints produced right before the war, during the war, and after the war. And this is an area of Japanese printmaking I think that gets overlooked, partly because there's a division of pre-war and post-war, and people think of Japanese prints in a certain way before the war and then after the war, but they don't really consider the artwork being produced during the war, and some of those designs really reflect some amazing emotional responses that the artist had to the war. And the other reason why I think this idea sort of pervades Japanese prints is that it's seen through the eyes of Shinhanga. And so what I mean by that is that mostly Shinhanga collectors or scholars or even curators, they look at pre-war, post-war because they look at changes in the artist's subject, style, and quite frankly, most of us know that post-war Japanese prints of the Shinhanga genre, particularly Hasui, Shinsui, and others, lack the inspiration that their earlier work has. And so there's this division, and a lot of collectors look for pre-war designs, although there are exceptions, and there's certainly some Hasui designs that are done after the war, and Shinsui designs that are masterpieces. No arguments there. But generally speaking, there's a bit of a decline in the artistry in those artists. And I would say, generally speaking, in Shinhanga in general, after the war. But that is not the case for other genres of printmaking. And I will be presenting both Shinhanga and Sosakuhanga artists. And I'm going to show some prints that you probably have never seen before from some minor artists and some important artists. And we'll be talking about how important this event was to the artists themselves, and how that changed the course of their lives, and how it changed art history. So we'll be discussing all of that on Saturday. And so today I'd like to discuss one particular print that I will present on Saturday. I'll be showing dozens of prints, but this is one that will wet your whistle and kind of give you a sense of where we're going to go. So without further ado, let's go to the table and have a look. So I have for you today a print by the Shinhanga artist Kawase Hasui. And Hasui is one of the most important 20th century Shinhanga printmakers. He produced some of the most iconic designs in the genre. You know, you get if you're familiar with Hasui, and even if you aren't, you probably have seen a Hasui print, either as a greeting card or as a calendar. So he's most known for his snow scenes or landscapes of Japan, and their idyllic scenes of Japan as it once was, not necessarily how Japan looked at the time when Hasui was working. But this print is a bit of a departure for his body of work, because this depiction is actually contemporaneous to the artist working. It's not an idyllic scene of bygone Japan. It is a scene of a historical event happening in real time for the artist. So this design is titled The Red Setting Sun. It was done in 1937, and it depicts Japanese soldiers on horseback as they, travel across the landscape. And this scene really is depicting a larger scale conflict that is happening. It started in 1937, and it was the second Sino-Japanese War. So in 1937 through 1945, Japan basically invaded a part of China and Manchuria, and they occupied Manchuria up until 1945. So the end of the war really ended that. And this scene depicts the soldiers at a time that is very poetic, with the sun setting, and the colors are very, I'm going to describe them accurately. This is very heroic, and it also is supposed to sort of conjure up feelings of nationalism for the Japanese. The color red is a national color, the color associated with the rising sun. But here the troops are sort of transversing a field, and then you see the red from the setting sun. And it's a very poetic, and I would dare say very theatrical design. As I said, it is meant to stir up emotions and feelings of patriotism in the Japanese populace. So technically, this design was not produced for foreign consumption. By and large, most of Hasui's prints were designed for foreign consumption. Most of them were purchased by foreigners, and Hasui was very popular, as well as Hiroshi Yoshida, Shinsui, and others. And these artists sold very well overseas. But this design is actually quite rare. It was a design that was sort of, I would say it was the brainchild of the publisher's nephew. He decided that it would be a good idea to produce a few war prints. And I use war prints in air quotes because they're not traditional war prints. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. But these are more poetic. They're more about the artistry that the artist can bring, as well as the publishers, woodblock print carvers, and printers. Because this is, again, a Shinhanga print, it was done by a collaborative process of artisans carving the blocks and printers printing the print, and of course the publisher organizing the entire project. And since it was the publisher's nephew who came up with this, Hasui, of course, took up the challenge and produced 4 designs that highlight this very poetic, nationalistic sort of style of imagery. And he produced 4, and I think, in my opinion, this design is probably the best of all 4. I don't have all 4 here to show you, but I'm fortunate enough to have the very best one. And as I said, it's very theatrical, it's very moving and powerful, but it's also, in my opinion, this work is an important artifact in history. This is not just a work of art, and some people might say it's propaganda, and I could certainly see that, but it is also an artifact of what was happening at this time, because this print was done in 1937, the same year that the Japanese invaded Manchuria and started the Second Sino-Japanese War. It's an important work because of that. And some war scholars and historians have argued that actually World War II started in 1937. Now, the consensus generally has been that World War II started in 1939 with Hitler invading Poland. And that's true. However, the Japanese invading Manchuria really set the stage for Hitler to do that, and then the global conflict sort of ballooning. So basically, this print is very important because of its historical context in this sort of intricate web of this strategic war, or the conflict that was raging right there starting in 1937. So this sort of got the ball rolling for something much larger. And this design really connects all of those things for us. So what I want to talk about is artistically this style of printmaking. I think Hasui, and I should point out that this print is illustrated in this fantastic book called Conflicts of Interest, Art and War in Modern Japan. And this was an exhibition catalog for an exhibition that occurred at St. Louis Art Museum a couple years ago. And it was a fantastic exhibition. I attended it in person, bought this book. The book is fantastic. If you couldn't attend the exhibition, this book is a must if you're interested in this genre. And I believe Philip, who mentioned that this design was based on photographs from an album. And I could certainly see that. And I also see a connection to the earlier Meiji period war triptychs. And so what this book does is it highlights war triptychs and war prints that occurred in the Meiji period. That was a big thing in the Meiji period. There was a lot of conflicts Japan was involved with Russia and also with China. And, there's a lot of prints that were produced, and they were very popular up until the end of the Meiji period. And so what I want to point out is that stylistically, I think Hasui is also drawing upon the tradition of Kyochika. And Kyochika was a master printmaker. He created some amazing kabuki designs as well as other designs, but he was also fantastic at creating these, if I can angle this book correctly, these war scenes. And I think it was Kyochika's interest in kabuki theater and theatrical scenes that sort of translated really well in how he depicted conflicts in these war triptychs. So they're very theatrical, they're very moving, and they were meant to be. They were meant to stir emotions in people. And so, in this case, you see this burning architecture in the background, maybe a gate to get into a city. And then you see these heroic Japanese soldiers emerging in silhouette from a conflict that is occurring right at the bottom of a mountainside, and then you see the silhouette of the actual combat in the water. So that is very striking. It's, as I said, very theatrical, and I think Hasui is really drawing upon all of those things. The scene is in his design is shown in a way that these figures are shown elevated from the viewer. So the viewer is here at the bottom looking up at these heroic figures. And in these, it almost reminds me of one of these war sculptures that you would find in a memorial, that they're towering figures above the viewer, and there's this element of that in this design. And of course, the color choice, the silhouetted figures, all of that really pay homage to Kyochika, at least in my opinion. So I just wanted to connect those two. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of this design for connoisseurs of Shinhanga is it's important to know that this design is done in a slightly smaller format. It is not Oban. It's slightly smaller. It's like Ibon. And I think it's even larger than Ibon. It's kind of in between Chuban and Oban. But it is not full size. And the other thing about this is interesting is that this impression is known in different versions, or this design is known in different versions. And so here, there's this gray halo around the figures. And you see that there. And that's an effective device that sort of creates a sense of movement and almost enhances the black of the silhouette. But on later impressions, that block is missing. So this is a first state version of this design, which is pretty cool. So you always want to collect the earliest impressions, and this is certainly one of those things. And so I did want to point that out because this design does come up for sale every so often, and you want to look for that silhouette of lighter gray around the figures, ensuring that you have a true first state. And I should also point out that these 4 designs did not sell well. There was a reason why war triptychs or war designs sort of fell out of popularity. It was primarily based during the Meiji period, but as the 20th century opened and there were other artists interested in other subjects, the war triptychs weren't a thing, and so during this time, as the conflicts were starting to initiate, this was really one of the only few examples that a Shinhanga artist produced in an attempt to showcase the theater of war. And it's very tame in that sense. You don't see these figures actively engaged in conflict. It's more contemplative and more, as I said, more poetic. So I also want to sort of point out, here, hold on. I mean, this book is actually fantastic. So, I think it's still available on Amazon, and I would certainly recommend this. So, what I wanted to point out is that there are a couple of books that I think are also quite helpful when you're doing research on this topic. There's this book here about views of the Dark Valley, which is in reference to the period of time that after sort of Taisho, and once Japan started getting into these conflicts with China, and became much more of a global military power, that time up until the end of the war where democracy was reestablished, that time was considered the time of the Dark Valley. And so, this book dives into Japanese cinema and sort of the culture of nationalism. And I kind of connects cinema and theater with arts. And this is very much part of sort of the conversation that was being sort of brought out by artists, either through the cinema, through books, or now Hasui was producing these prints. Now, again, he only made 4 of them, and they did not sell well, which says something, I think. And we will be talking about that more in depth on Saturday. But the other thing I want to point out is this is a really great article that is in Impressions, number 23. This came out in 2001, and you can buy these. This journal. Impressions, by the way, is the journal for the Japanese Art Society of America. And you can contact them and buy it. But there's this great article by Kendall Brown about the Dark Valley and these prints produced right before the war and during the war. So I highly recommend this because this article is fantastic. And it really hits the nail on the head about what we're going to discuss on Saturday. So, I spoke a lot. Now I'm going to zoom in so you can look at the actual print. If anyone is familiar with Hasui and has also the Hasui catalog raisonné, or just is familiar with this body of work, one quickly acknowledges how different this design is when compared to the rest of his body of work. And so as a collector and also as a dealer, I actively seek out prints that are not necessarily what you expect from an artist, because I think those exceptions also teach us a lot about the artist at work. And I think Hasui, using silhouettes, really conveys everything he wanted to convey in a very poetic form. And again, I think that's really connected to Kyochika's work here. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me on Woodblock Wednesday. And again, I just want to say that it's wonderful to be back. I took a few weeks off to take care of some things from my business, my website, and of course to prepare for the upcoming talk this Saturday. So I'm going to encourage all of you, if you can, to join us live here at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. So I'm in Chicago. It'll be at 1 p.m. Chicago time, 2 p.m. New York time, or 11 California time? No, 1, 12, yeah, 11 o'clock. So, basically we'll be discussing this topic, and I'll be showcasing prints produced in reaction to the nuclear bombings that occurred in Japan. There's so many things that I'll be showing that is important and rare, that a lot of these things are unique in many cases. And so I hope that you can make it. Otherwise, if you can't, like all of my videos, including my past seminars, I'll be uploading them onto YouTube. But if you're able to attend live, that'd be great, because you could ask questions at the end of the seminar. So I look forward to seeing all of you there, and thank you for joining me on Woodblock Wednesday. And of course, I'll be live next Wednesday, bringing you another fascinating or wonderful work of art. Until then, I'll see you on Saturday. Bye.